The deaf school that I attended put on different events such as the Deaf Children's Festival or ASL Lit Week, and one time I was asked to compete in these events and I was just so excited. I went and I recorded myself signing. I ended up winning a trophy for this and I got a ribbon and everything, and doing that really gave me the confidence that I needed. So when I look back on my experiences at the deaf school, I'm just so thankful. So thank you to the deaf school. I was born into a hearing family and they all signed, but really where I felt most at home was at the deaf school. When I look back at my time at the deaf school, there's one memory that comes to mind. I was in middle school, really young, and I decided that I wanted to make a movie. So my friend, he ended up having a camcorder, and so I borrowed that from him. The two of us went up to our RA at the dorm, and I asked if I could make a movie, and he said, yeah, go right ahead. It just needs to be done in about 2 or 3 days. And I said, great. So me and my friend, we went out and started making this movie. I gathered people to come and help out with it and all the materials we needed. We really didn't have a lot of stuff, but we did what we could with what we had. And so eventually, a couple days later, the whole school came and watched the premiere of my movie, and it just really inspired me. But I mean, if nobody signed, this couldn't have been possible for me to show everyone, so it was just a really cool experience. Thanks to the deaf school, really. Growing up, I went to a mainstream hearing school, and it was fine. I was a little bit more timid than I maybe normally am. But I accepted it. It was okay. But once I transferred over to the deaf school, I mean, my confidence just raised exponentially, and it was so great for me. My creativity and expressions just skyrocketed, and I just fell in love with ABC stories and ASL poetry and how you can just create new words. It was so great. It was really cool. When I was in the deaf school, we had this book that we had to read, and it was by Edgar Allan Poe, and it was called The Raven. This is a literature class, so we had to read this book, and it was all over my head. I had no clue how I was going to be able to do this, but then my teacher was deaf, and she started signing the book, and that was kind of a turning point for me. From then on, I understood English a lot better, and I understood how to read, and I mean, that was great for me. All growing up, I really enjoyed team sports, and so I was on the sport team with an all-hearing group, and I mean, I enjoyed it, but they made me feel like I was kind of less than them and like I couldn't play because I was deaf. But then once I joined the deaf schools team, it was so different, and we all communicated the same way, and it really influenced the way that I felt about myself and playing this sports team. Because at the hearing school with the hearing kids, there was no communication, so there could be really no system for us to play. But at the deaf school, it was so different because we could communicate and there was a system and it all made sense. So really thank you to the deaf school for that. All growing up, I was really shy. It was kind of actually pretty bad how shy I was. But when I went to the deaf school, they had this drama program that I was interested in. So I joined that and I worked really hard. And eventually, my confidence just kept increasing over time and my shyness just kind of started to go away. And I thought that was just so amazing. Growing up, I attended a mainstream hearing school, and with that, I needed an interpreter in there, and so they would stand at the front of the room and interpret. But if it so happened that the interpreter could not be there, I would have to interpret and have to get in front of the whole class and sit there and interpret. I didn't like it. But when I finally moved over to the deaf school, I mean, there was no need for an interpreter anymore. Nobody was depending on me for that. I was finally free to just be a student. The first time that I went to a deaf school, I met this woman who was a deaf teacher. Her name was Kim Alago, and she took the time to explain to me about deaf culture, ASL, and how important facial expressions are to our culture and everything that we do. And I mean, it really took me aback hearing all of that. So I took a second and I, analyzed myself and realized that I wasn't utilizing facial expressions like I probably should be. So from that point on, I changed and now I do all of these things and I'm so glad for it. So now you've seen all these different stories and experiences with attending a deaf school. And I also went to a deaf school, but will I be the last?